I think what's interesting here is it's a bit of a contradiction in terms when you sort of dive into it a little bit more when it comes to football intelligence. What do you believe it is broadly? Because obviously we're going to get into the weeds here.
I think what the guys have said has been fair, but I think it's all relative to particular moments and positions and things like that as well. You know, I think coming through an academy, I think it's kind of linked to talent as well, because you might not necessarily have the full sort of like tactical understanding of a situation. But then when I play against some people in my career who had the technique, the talent, and that football intelligence, it feels like they're manipulating the game constantly. You know, understanding when the right time to do something is, understanding the right place to be. And a lot of the real football intelligence that I see, I think it is more for like football perverts, because I think the average person...
You went football perverts on the bingo card.
Yeah, I think most people in a crowd might not understand what somebody's doing. You know, football intelligence, for example, could be, you know, you're playing against a team who wants to man mark you. So all of a sudden that person takes himself out of the game to create space for somebody else. And no one's going to notice that. They'll be like, oh, this guy's been quiet today.
Yes.
But they've actually been influential.
Okay, so my second question was... what's something that, when you're watching a game of football, that most fans are missing? That you'll hear people talking about football or what they see. Like, for example, one thing I'll say that's quite specific to QPR, but when our goalkeeper gets the ball, I can feel my dad panicking. Or he's got better because I've explained it to him. But this understanding of, like, you know, you're looking to sort of bait the press so that you can play through the press is something that a lot of people are just like, to the podcast that you'll hear later in the week, Nathan was saying there was a woman who would always shout, "Get it forward!"
Oh gosh.
Or like the other thing of like put a tackle in, and like get at them when you as a team are playing in a bit of a low block. There's a lot of things like that. Is there anything that springs to mind when you think that people are just not seeing when it comes to football?
I think a lot of it for me is looking at players that understand game state, and a big thing for that is players that know when to change the pace of a game. So, for example, if you look at Spurs right now, I have a big issue with their forward line because everything is very one-paced. It has to be direct, immediate. If it doesn't end in a chance on goal immediately, then the ball's going to get turned over. It lacks players that can put their foot on the ball and go, well, okay, right now the gaps aren't there, but how can I manipulate the opposition? Could be through combination play, could be through slowing down, it could be through speeding up the attack. I think that players that understand game state, and I think probably get onto it in a bit, I think modern day coaching from a young age, a lot of the time across the board, means there's less of those players nowadays that just feel the game, understand the rhythm of the game, because they're so used to robotically being told what to do all the time, where to stand, where to be from a young age. Mm-hmm. So they're almost being robotically trained from a young kid to just listen to the coach.
And are you seeing that? Because I guess if you've got an academy and you've got players coming through it, you want to teach them, you know, as much as possible broadly. But I interviewed Oscar Bob the other week. I saw you interact with it on Twitter. Thanks for that. Oscar Bob was saying that, so in Norway, they created all these really small pitches so that people getting on the ball in tight areas, basically. And Oscar Bob said that until I was 13, 14, I had no understanding. Like, they didn't do any tactics in any way, shape or form. So in terms of what we're seeing in academies, what is the current balance when it comes to the freedom and feel of football, but also...
A lot of academies have different kind of philosophies. Pep has completely changed the game, but for the last 10, 15 years, everyone follows sort of the FA's guidance and sort of the coaching courses, and everyone's playing a certain style. So you may get some Category 1 academies that are running their own sort of philosophy, and it might all be about 1v1s, and it's about individual technical sort of the four corner module. And then you'll get some academies where they're looking for more physical players, they're looking for the height and the physical presence early on, and they'll develop the technical side of things. And you'll get some academies that they just want players that can play, and they'll develop them throughout the years. And it varies depending on the category levels at the academy. So Man City, Arsenal, Chelsea, the Cat 1s that are up there compared to the Chesterfields or the Port Vales, you can't replicate that because the better players will go to the Cat 1s and they're able to implement more of their coaching styles, where the lower you go down, and even at grassroots, they're going to try and play out from the back, but you don't really have the players.
It's resources, isn't it, really? You know what I mean? Like, you can have the idea of trying to play out, but if you're playing on like just mud, it's going to be very hard for you to do. If you're playing out with people, and for me, I believe a lot of tactical stuff, the best ones that I've played with are the ones who will hear the instruction and understand why. Because from when you gather the why, you continue to do it.
Right.
Like to tell a winger, for example, I want you to stay high and wide, but they might not touch the ball for 5 minutes. That winger might lose significant interest, but them being there creates more space for somebody else. And that winger might be one of the best at being able to dribble. But it's like, understand, just trust it. Like we, to link to QPR now. So when Ian Holloway was manager, this might sound nuts to you, okay? Bear with me.
Often a caveat.
This might sound
story,
nuts. But I think it
Ian.
was 2016, 17 possibly. And we were playing away at Reading. And I think it was Reading, we were in the hotel and he says, right, here's the team. But he had 2 tactics boards out. Mm-hmm. And he flipped over the first one. We were playing a back 3. And then he flipped over the second one. And in attack, Grant Hall go and play in midfield.
Okay.
I was like, that's weird. What does it mean? Defender's going to go and play in midfield and attack? Like,
was Pep in this room? Is this what John Stones?
Mate, this is the
ripple effect.
Listen, mate, I'm looking back. I'm like, okay, that aged really well. But there were other parts of things which he try and say because when he came, like his time at Blackpool in the Premier League, he had certain things which he believed in, and there were certain structures you'd have, sort of moving the ball to play a diagonal ball, and the diagonal was never for the winger to win. It was for the winger to contest because in the time the diagonal was being set up, there'd be an overload on that side. So he said, this is what we're doing. And at the time, we had small wingers. And the wingers didn't like having diagonal come towards them because he said, well, how can I win this?
Yeah.
But he said to them, you're not there to win it. You're there to contest so that they head it down. We've got a 3v1.
Right.
And he said other things like in general training, when we're building out, we'll always have 3 people to occupy their back 4. Yeah? Okay. And he wants the 9 central and he wants the 2 wingers to be inside. Yeah? Always 3 people, never 2, never 4. He used to record every training session and every day for about 2 weeks. He'd look back at the video after training and it was anything but 3. It was always 4,
right.
Sometimes 2. But for those guys, they're just playing the game and they have an ability, but they don't understand the why.
Right.
But if you understand the why, then that's a skill in itself. That's why the best teams, when they play against you, say the ones who say Premier League level, there's a reason why it feels like they've got extra players because they're putting people in the right positions. And these guys have got so much ability, but they've also got control of the game. This is the reason why, for example, they can sustain attacks. Really good teams sustain attacks. Mm-hmm. Teams with good attacking players, they'll go really fast. As you said, maybe like Spurs, and then there's a turnover, the next thing getting hit on the break. Yeah. Like looking at Arsenal's, Man City's, to a certain extent Liverpool's, they strangle you within the game. And that comes with an understanding tactically of the coach, but then also the ability and individual thought of the players at the same time. So
just to say, guys, whenever you've got a question that pops into your head, please do jump in on this.
I've got one actually, so let's jump in again. So you mentioned the idea of like things becoming a bit more robotic, and I do see that to a certain extent. Yeah. But say, to link it to QPR again, someone like Adel Taarabt, his season that he had in the Championship was better than the season he had in the Premier League. Adel Taarabt, with his abilities, do you think he'd be better today or worse?
I think that he would drive a lot more coaches mental nowadays, especially if he's an under 13, because, what I see a lot of, and again, everyone's different. There's always going to be outliers, isn't there? I just think that if you look at a lot of teams nowadays, the players, you can see their brain working in the sense of I must do A, B or C. And if I don't do A, B or C, coach is going to kill me. But right. You've played the game to the highest level. That's not realistic necessarily when it gets into the first team. I don't have any issue with what a first team manager wants to do because their whole entire remit is to win the game. So if they think it's going to happen by keeping certain players wide, is what it is. I have an issue when it's being done at a youth level because that for me is not how you build a player broadly and you make them, again, a little robot for the system. And that is why you see less players nowadays that perhaps have that maverick ingenuity or ability to think for themselves because they've just been so used from the age of 7 having a coach tell them that when you get the ball here, you pass there or there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying I'm right or that's wrong. It's just my opinion. And I think that it's okay to own an overall framework, but within that framework, empower the player to make the decision. I don't see why you can't do both. Whereas I think if you instruct a player, let's say you start off as a defender at 9 years old, and you're taught that you always play it into the 6. You're teaching your brain to now miss players further ahead. Yeah. But that might be a top tier pass. And also, it's quite backwards because there's no first team in the world that plays that way. We all eulogise about Ederson's kicking. So you use Pep as the example for playing out from the back. How often do you see Ederson miss everyone out? But there's so many academies or young players that aren't allowed to do that because the coach says, you've got to play my pattern. And they're like, how does that help build a player? So in first team, it's a different story. Do what you want to, what you think win the game. So sort of to answer your question, I think that someone like Tourette, with that incredible magic talent, there'd be a lot more things in his way nowadays coming through. Because
There's
again,
less of them type of players, though.
1,000%.
The last few years, from the Yannick Bolasie, Zaha, like all of them players, they're diluting it as the Premier League years are going on and on, because the moment you get it, Doku is probably one of the most exciting players in the Prem. How many times is he going to take a player on? Jack Grealish, they're just going to set it, because the moment they lose it, they're going to get abuse. And there's not that many Premier League players like them. So the Adele that would just sit in the 10 and create, he'd have that license and that freedom.
That's what I was going to say that, because first of all, in terms of sort of knowing your options and that only being it, I remember, so when I was at university, I played with a guy he'd been released by Bolton. He'd been at Man United before that. He was a left back. We went to the footy trials for the uni team, and he played left back. He played 20 minutes, and he just played these little passes. It was either that one or one into the channel or to the front man. Did it really quickly, really easily, right? And he looked, played one pass with the outside of his left foot that sort of span like on the inside of the right back and into the park. I was like, wow.
I've got footage of Adam doing that, by the way, 5-a-side.
Hey,
Somehow I've got to show you.
Don't doubt that for a second. Don't doubt that for a second. But so fast forward about 3 months, and he's playing for the first team. And I was like, wow, like you're amazing. And he's like, well, yeah, well, for years and years, when I got the ball, I had 4 options, and those were your 4 options, and you do those 4 options.
Yeah.
I said, oh, can you come play for my 6-a-side team? Because I was thinking result, right? So I've got to bring him in. He was horrific. Because and I came after, I was like, you're right. Are you hungover or something? And he's like, no, I just can't play. I just don't know what to do. Like his brain can't compute to it. Like to put that back to Rapt, I think that's interesting. When we talk about football intelligence, how much? So you said there, for him to thrive at the highest level, because that's one thing. And again, you said this in the other podcast about some players are great, but they don't get the chance to be great. For Rapt to be great, there has to be that acceptance, and you have to allow for him to be great. In terms of football intelligence, how intelligent was he, as opposed to how talented was he?
Right, brace yourself for this.
Did you know that was coming? Did you give me a
face? Yeah, because I was ready to go. So with Adele, interestingly, I think he used his full ability the most when he was at QPR. But I think his football intelligence was greater towards the end of his career when he was playing defensive midfield for Benfica. Because he had to understand his role. Yeah. He had to understand when to go, when not to go, how to link the play. And that was him really learning about the game as such in that moment. And I think I've barely seen Adele defend in a 5-a-side. So to all of a sudden see him doing it for Benfica, then yeah, I think his football intelligence, as wild as this may seem, would be higher in that moment.
Utilised in a different way, isn't it? Because you say, like, the Championship, he obviously succeeded, right? He did not succeed in the Premier League, really.
No, his talent, he did good things in the second half of that season when we stayed up.
Yeah.
Adele's talent, from people I've played with, and I've played with some really good players, is comparable to, like, Yaya Touré's, David Silva's, whatever. Wow. It's comparable, completely comparable. But their ability to impact a game is far greater, because they had that link to the football intelligence as well. Like when I was at City, we went through lots of changes at the club, and then David Silva arrives, and we were in a game, and I had the ball, and I looked, and he was coming towards me, and there was someone right behind him, like basically nibbling on his neck, desperate to like try and get after him. So I turned the other way and played it somewhere else, and then he started shouting at me. I was like, "What's the problem?" He said, "Listen, if I ask for the ball, give me the ball." I said, "Yeah, but there's someone behind you." He said, "That's when I want the ball." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He says, "This is when I can manipulate the situation." I was like, huh. Okay.
Completely different to Man United's Fred when he wants the ball and he's coming short to receive it.
Like, and like David Silva is probably like 5'7" or whatever, weighs next to nothing, isn't strong, but he's taking you for a ride. It's the same you see with Bernardo Silva now. Like, for as much as, in fact, one thing I found, so when I play football now as an amateur, there are lots of people who try and prove a point against me because I played, and try and prove a point by doing step overs and stuff like that. I'm like, mate, it's 2024, If you look at, like, I've seen that, like, from when I was a kid, and also from better players. But then as you look at football now, a lot of people aren't really coming with tricks like that to beat someone.
No.
And what they're doing, some of the best ones, they're waiting for you to move. So you're in this elaborate game of cat and mouse, and that to me is the thing that terrifies me.
Yeah.
When I'm trying to like defend against someone, and I know they're waiting for me, but I'm trying to wait for them.
It's the trigger movements.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I've slightly leaned to the left. Oh no, he's gone.
We've got to explain this because I think staying around to Raptors is an interesting one here because, like, when you say with the evolution of him, and again coming back to this idea of football intelligence, him as a DM. What I remember from the QPR days when he played, if he would play say like left wing, and in that season where we stayed up, we had 5 or 6 games and beat Arsenal, beat those guys. I remember thinking, I had a bit of a theory because Eze was quite good at this as well. Was defensively when they wanted to be, they're actually very good because they knew what you were trying to do.
Yeah, I think to just put it out there to begin with. Yeah, I think defending is a skill, but the biggest part of it is effort. It's a huge part of it,
and a lot of players that are attack minded don't
want
have
to do that.
that.
So to wrap in that 5-game spell, I remember it was one of those big games. He made like several tackles, but he was in the mood, I think, because it was like, right, it's like
stupid. I hate this so much because like, think of these guys. Yeah, if you see,
do you agree with what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with you what you're saying. If you see like a way like training sessions work, you'll do things like possession. You do 5-a-sides. Yeah, if you cannot defend, you would not be able to thrive in that environment.
Right. Yeah.
But instead, like, you know, we're doing a possession, I'm trying to pass the ball here. Lo and behold, this attacker reads it and gets the ball or whatever. Oh, so you can defend. All right, okay. Oh, it's 5-a-side. Oh, let me go and press the guys up and score. Instead, everyone's like, oh, no, you know, I just can't do it. It's so difficult. Like, just try. Just try.
So when he becomes this DM and he's sitting there, because he's not actually having to probably make too many out-and-out tackles, it's anticipation, it's feel, it's understanding what other people are doing.
And this is where we talk about the game intelligence, because everyone's going to think, when you think about or talk about Adele, you're talking about the streets will never forget what he does, the nutmegs, everything going forward. The coaches, the pure lovers of football that love football players and how it's played, will see the footage of what it was like at Benfica, coming towards the end of his AC Milan career, and he was dropping back, and it was understanding. They're the clips that you want to show the kids about his movement out of possession. And similar when I said when Fred was at United, there's one thing dropping to receive, but then it's, are you receiving it on the safe side? Are you going to turn into... And Troy Deeney spoke about this when Watford played United all them years ago. Their training sessions were on the trigger movements of the moment Fred goes to receive the ball, that's when we press, because they know he's got to take 2 touches before he can turn out, where you're talking about David Silva and all these players that they want it and can turn in one and know what players are on them, know they can turn safe side, either side, and that's the difference between game intelligence.
So 2 things. First of all, explain for people that don't understand it, explain trigger movements and explain safe side.
Trigger movements for me are understanding when the opposition have possession of the ball, the goalkeeper has it. If you're a centre forward and you're in between the 2 centre backs, the trigger movements out of possession are you're going to shuffle across when the ball goes from goalkeeper to right back. Just understanding someone's going to drop in to receive, they're going to turn out, they're going to play, and just understanding the movement that you're going to produce out of possession when your team have possession of the ball. If you're a right winger and you're tucking across to central midfield because the ball's on the left-hand side, the moment that ball drops, you know your trigger movement, instead of just some players will ball watch, your trigger movement is now going to be, I'm going to make the pitch as wide and stretch it as much as I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then safe side, again, just because I think some people might not understand.
Safe side. So if you're giving the ball back to a goalkeeper, you play it on their safe side, which is their stronger side. If you've got if someone's marking you, you want to receive it on the safe side where you can turn away if they're on the left-hand side, so you can turn to the right.
A lot of that stuff is spot on, and especially, again, like, getting a chance to play football with amateurs is I've loved it because I've learned so much. I've learned so much. Like we're seeing different games, like little things. Like Dan's talking about, like safe side, like making a pass to the safe side. If someone's on someone's right, you play it to their left. You know, if you want someone to turn, you'll do it in a certain way. If you play a ball to someone, like, if you can receive the ball in the half turn, it immediately deters the person who wants to come and try and press you.
Right.
Because all of a sudden, they're not coming towards your back anymore. They see you've opened out and they can't overcommit. Mm-hmm. There's so many little things like that. And I think we're talking about attackers and defending and in-game intelligence. One of my favourite players for that, in terms of knowing when to press and how he presses, is Martin Odegaard. Martin Odegaard is unreal. Yeah. He initiates Arsenal's press. I'm like, well, you're just a 10, you know what I mean? This fancy player. but he's their most aggressive guy.
And that's his form of leadership, I think, a lot of the time with him. Like the thing that gets thrown at him sometimes is that he's not he's not banging it in from 25 yards. He's not that kind of player, and I mean, shouting you can only do so much in those big stadiums as well, I'd imagine nowadays. But in terms of him sort of playing by example out of possession, that's why they're the best out of possession team in Europe.
But then if you break it down even more, some fans are going to see he's great at pressing. If you break that down, you're going to talk about his angle of approach, the angle that he runs in to make play switch. So it's some players are just going to run and just be headless chickens, whereas you can see sort of his angle of approach where he's trying to make play switch or he's trying to start again. Like that's the difference between, and it's me personally, I train with some very good players, and technically I train alongside them and I'm good enough when we're training. When it comes to a game and we're doing keep ball, that's when the game, and that's when you get some players that I'm a winger, I'm five-a-side, that's me. The moment you put me in centre midfield, I'm lost. I get the ball, someone's on me already, whereas you get some of them players that play central midfield, they get it, they've got all the time and space, and they've got no pace, they've got, no technique, but they've got all the time, whereas me, I'm like, I'm quick, I've got some feet. The moment I get it, I'm lost. So that's the difference with game intelligence.
I think that's
and
sort of
position.
what you were alluding to earlier, Nedum, in terms of like understanding the why. So, one thing that really annoys me about modern discourse in football is like, let's say you have a player and they say he's a really good finisher. I'm like, what does that mean? So you're like, there's a wide variety of things that constitute being a good finisher. You said earlier about Odegaard. It's not as simple as he's really good at pressing. Well, there are things that he's perhaps not as good at with pressing. Does he leave space? I'm not saying in Odegaard in particular, but does he leave space in behind? I think the why is the players that understand. So like one thing that I notice, I don't know if you're the same, but with a lot of young players nowadays, football has been almost taught to them in the sense that everything has to be 100 miles an hour. So a lot of them really lack pass appreciation. So because everything is fired in 100 miles an hour. And it's like, you need to be able to cope with that. But sometimes actually the better thing to do is to perhaps put a slower ball in to entice the defender to press you and leave the gaps elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's football intelligence. It's the why. Why are we doing this action at this moment? And do we understand that? And that's where so many, because everything, they just get caught into this world of like, it looks great on Instagram where everything's 100 miles an hour, pop, 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 pop. But you might be doing 5 passes and haven't gone anywhere. Whereas a smarter player might go, well, if you slow down a second there, he will come draw to you there. That will leave space there. Now we've broken you in one pass, and that's where players like Odegaard come into there.
So I'm gonna sound like I'm moaning now, yeah. But trust me, where I'm not, because I understand this perspective overall. I think people who are, say, mid to late 30s and beyond, I think they have a vision of football based on how they were coached about it to be able to move the ball quickly, like, and to do this and to do that. But football's changing to the point where very few teams do that, especially on their build-outs. And there is a case of trying to entice people and teams onto them, and that's based on other people being in certain positions. And the benefit of that is something where I think through traditional media, like say TV and so on, they won't discuss the why. They'll discuss when there's a mistake that comes.
Right.
And for me, there's when it comes out to playing from the back and so on, there's a difference between intent and execution, yeah? If the intent is right and the execution is wrong, you can coach a player to execute it better or find a player that'll be able to execute it more so. And that's why managers don't budge from their plans, because they believe in the intent. And when they, for example, can reap the rewards, say if you start with the goalkeeper, 2 centre-backs and so on, and everyone's set up in a certain way, and they roll it out, maybe they don't roll out, maybe because they want a 3v3 up high. You will never have that 3v3 up high if you don't set up to play out. You'll never do it.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Which is what Marty's doing right now.
Yeah, literally, you'll never have it unless you set up that way. But people are like, oh, why are you doing this? It's, why is the centre back passing to the goalkeeper?
Yeah, they can't handle it.
It's the full field of vision now. Yeah. They can go whichever way they want.
Yeah.
So why are they doing this? But then if a mistake comes, it's like stupid. You should never do this because you're under pressure and so on and so forth. One thing that goes under the radar from this weekend's football, Aston Villa played out from the back probably 90% of the time away at Arsenal. And there were times when Arsenal looked like they were going to take it from them, but they never did. And by the end of the game, Arsenal was so broken.
Ragged.
They were so broken that Villa could get out as and when they pleased.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And Joe, again, you talk about the why. Carl Walker was doing a podcast with Rio Ferdinand recently, and he was, everyone wants to, the crumbs of like Pep. And Carl Walker said, like, a lot of it's actually really simple. It's he sort of said to it, when people go man to man,
there's no man to man, is there?
It doesn't exist because you've got the goalie.
Yeah.
Like, you're fine. And he's like, Especially if that goalie's Edison, you're sweet.
That is what is missed so often nowadays. Good coaching for me is making complex ideas come across quite simple, and I think a lot of nowadays, I guess I get it because of social media, everyone wants to try and prove they know more, so they use they make simple ideas seem complex the other way around, and that's not what coaching is. And that coaching is about getting your player to understand what it is that you want, or empower them to do it, and make it as simple as you can, because it isn't rocket science. Yes, there might be complex ideas, but it's not rocket science. And can you get your players to understand that in a simple way? And then again, back to why the good players understand that and can take that on and interpret it in their way as well, rather than just being those robots where if it doesn't work or they have a plan for me, now I'm
I'd
fried.
love commentators, pundits to go on coaching courses.
Yes.
For them to understand. And it sounds boring, I know, but if they were to, they can help educate the audience.
That's what it's supposed to do.
My issue is when I'm watching a game, they're always just moaning. There's never, or they might be praising,
and creating a narrative and then just running with it.
But
even when
they're not educating. They're not, and that's what I would love commentators and pundits to be able. Just literally, they didn't do this. They couldn't complete this phase of play because, or why are they dropping back, or why are they? There's a clip. I think it was a few years ago. Lovren, last couple minutes for Liverpool, has just clipped the ball in. It's like the 96th minute, and Van Dijk is moaning at him saying, "Play it out wide." And the commentator, I don't know who it was, 2 seconds before Lovren just clipped it in, has said, "Put it in the box." And it's the fans. You're just planting that seed for them to. Van Dijk wants it out wide, so you can put everyone across, and then everyone moves back into the box. And it's trying to give that understanding to the audience, so that the bigger picture.
I think a lot of pundits and stuff, they've had great careers, but football's changed so much. Like, I retired 4 years ago.
I was going to say,
It's changed so much already. And I think
how so?
It's more so you're seeing more teams, say, trying to build out from the back now. You're seeing more sort of interest from certain parts of the physical side of things. And like, you play against teams now, it's not like a 10 plus this individual that's amazing. They will all find a way to do something against you.
Yeah.
Like, anything's possible. So to add to the point which you're trying to make, those guys played in different eras through different settings, whether it was field and so on. They've seen teams be really dominant playing a certain style. Like, say, for example, United, the most successful Premier League team in history so far. Like, we couldn't necessarily pin down this style of play to go into detail about it. Like, they had one. They had really good players. But it's not like we're going to be, let's talk about the X's and O's of Man United, because it was a bit more simple to understand.
Yeah, it just had a better team to a point.
But the change is so drastic. And for some of these guys, I don't think they like it. And they talk about it in a way whereby they wouldn't want to play in it. And they talk about it in a way, like you mentioned the idea of robot, and I think this is linked here. A manager will want a player to play who is an individual, but will do what the rest of the team expect them to do. But some of these guys, they played in an era whereby they were such big personalities that they can make a call on the field and everyone has to stick to it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't fly today.
Yeah.
I think so much of it, what you said earlier, is narrative-based as well. You were talking about building out from the back, and it's like, if a player makes a mistake, let's say you pass out to the centre-back and he loses the ball, every pundit has receipts of why playing out from the back, you can't do it there, whatever that means. You can't play with it. I don't know what that means. So is that part of the pitch now, a no-play zone?
Yeah.
But when that happens, you never see any pundit say, you can't play out from the back there if the decision is to go longer, and then the turnover from that results in a goal. No one ever analyses going longer there. Now, there's no wrong or right way to play. I believe that you can play any style of, within reason, any style of football and be successful for it. But it's just that narrative of like, oh my God, right, that was a pass short, so therefore you can't do it there. Well, as you said, the intent and the execution, analyse that. Now, if the intent is constantly perhaps to pass to someone that struggles with it and you're in a game and they can't do certain actions, then perhaps the intent is there to be spoken about.
Yeah, sure.
But if it's someone like, I don't know, let's say Saliba messes up by receiving the ball from Raya, how often does that happen? Doesn't really happen. So you can't then just go back to the narrative of you can't play there, because you can play there. You can play anywhere you want. It's just in that moment, is it the right thing to do? And sometimes it is, sometimes
also
it's not.
on that specific one, in terms of sort of baiting the press and playing through, when you concede, it's all in that same third of the pitch.
Yeah.
When you score from that exact same moment,
It's so
the
easily
goal's
forgotten
scored
about.
down the other end, and it's
Yeah,
so quickly forgotten about.
Yeah.
And it's I've seen it at QPR this year, and it's infuriating because you've got people around you just like don't give it to Begovic. Now I get Begovic isn't great on the ball right now, but like he's actually still got to play 5-yard passes.
It's one of those. It's one of those like sports or things in life where the more that people go to it, like it doesn't necessarily link to them understanding it anymore.
It
you know
feels
what I mean?
that way,
It just it just changes, and especially as you get towards the second half of the season where anxiety's through the roof already. You don't want to see risks.
Yeah.
But as time passes, because of say like guys like these two and so on, the risk is actually far smaller because the players are getting better at being able to take the ball under pressure. So it's the idea of risk and reward. But I'd say the risk comes low and the reward becomes higher.
I say to my players, it's a bigger risk to not take a risk, because if you want to word it that way, because if you do play safe and what safe might be, so you don't give the best of yourself and show what you truly can do, then you're limiting to what you can achieve. That for me is a far bigger risk than saying, well, I could possibly do this. I might make, literal errors more often, but now I've raised what I can get to, and I don't really believe in ceilings. I think anyone can achieve what they want. But if you do play safe in a sense, you are limiting what you as a player can achieve. Show your personality to go and do things and play the game how you feel and see it.
And as well, sorry, I'm talking a lot here.
I love it.
It only takes one, like a manager can have a plan, and it takes one person hiding for the plan to go out the window.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If we're all going to play out from the back, but one guy says, no, let's not play out from the back.
Yeah.
That affects not just the goalkeeper, the centre-backs, the midfielders, the forwards, everyone.
I don't know if you guys did you guys see the Newcastle Spurs game in the weekend?
Yeah.
For me, the biggest issue, or one of the, there was a few, it wasn't Van der Ven falling on his arse. That can happen. He's defending transitions against space. That can happen. It's the fact that quite often in that first half, whether it was tactics or lack of bravery, but Vicario was going long. But he's going long to players that aren't going to win the first duel, and then Newcastle were literally set in position to win the second duel, and now you've got the likes of Gordon and Isak and Barnes, who are phenomenal ball carriers, running at you with open space. So, that's lack of intelligence, because that's not understanding the game state, and that's where it also aligns with intelligence and bravery are often really closely linked, because intelligence is understanding what to do in that moment, and then bravery is, can you apply that? And that is where the truly elite players come into the fore. The likes of David Silva, you were saying earlier about he wants it under pressure because he understands that he can use that against the opposition. But then it's the bravery to do that.
And not a lot of players are brave enough. And
is it just because sorry to stop you there, but the bravery you're talking about, it's a new bravery, isn't it? I mean, it's not that new, really. But
taking risks and play, and that's why I think so many players will just play that square ball. They're keeping possession of the ball. Why are they going to try and do a 1v1 or try that little through ball where retain possession, switch sides, and then wait to find that gap? And I think that's the difference between the Premier League now to the Premier League 5-10 years ago, when we wanted the risk. We wanted the players that would try and find the gaps. And there wouldn't be an issue when they make mistakes. However, now, more social media, more commentators onto players that are making more mistakes, and now they're just keeping possession.
Do you think footballers? Because I mean, one thing I was going to say, look, again, I'm going to use QPR as my reference because we are trying to play that way. But sometimes when we're trying to get a goal late on, it's absurd to me because the last 5 minutes, the ball goes up, you go 7 minutes, you go result. We've got ages, and then they just get the ball and they go poof. To no one, it's so stupid when you've got a better chance. If you think about it, Gary Neville used to always say with Man United, Fergie would always say, he said, we'll get another chance. And that calmness will allow you to find and see the option when the time comes. Do you think footballers are more afraid now to try something?
Yes. Yeah. And you don't, social media, and this happens from academy age groups as well. I mean, it's all about up until under 21s, it's all about developing the players, individual development. Once you're first team, it's just about results. But even when you're an academy player, you're making a lot of mistakes. After January, you don't want to make no mistakes because there's retain and release. It's retain and release. Are you going to get kept on? Are you going to get dropped? And you don't want to be in the back of anyone's mind. You've had your termly reviews about what you're doing well, what you're doing not. And you might be that player that wants to take risks. So even at an academy level, the moment you make a mistake, you'll hear the parents in the background say something. The moment the goalkeeper gets it and plays it to right back and you lose it at right back every single time, the parents don't understand. this is part of their development. They've got to learn from their mistakes. This is how the coach wants them to work. However, the players hear that and they're like, yeah, I don't want to take a risk going further forward on the pitch. The number 10 might get it edge of the box and is like, normally they just want to shoot, but they don't want to take the risk. They might just want to set the ball or play. So
that's where I think we've gone a bit too far, though, as in how we develop players, because now it's about you do this no matter what. I used to work for an independent academy. I'm still obviously work with my colleague now, but we used to have a good relationship with clubs, and we went to a tournament in Liverpool, academy tournament, and one of the teams we played was Norwich, and this was under 13s. And in 2 games, we're an independent academy, so we're not a pro academy. We shouldn't be competing with them per se. We scored 8 goals in 2 games. 5 of them were from winning the ball directly off the goalkeeper.
Conceded 15.
Yeah, 5 of them were from winning the ball directly off the goalkeeper or intercepting his pass. Now, you can't tell me that's good for the goalkeeper, because he's been told you must play to only the centre backs. But we all know that's not real. And I think that I think we've gone too far the other way in terms of you've got to play in this style of football no matter what. And that's where the robots come. I think I kind of alluded to it. The most I learned in my 15 years of coaching was the week I spent with Palmeiras Academy. They were just phenomenal. And what we'll do in this country, because we want it to look a certain way, we might do a possession drill, for example, where you've got to do a minimum of 5 passes before you're allowed to score. What's that teaching the young 10-year-old? It's teaching him that, okay, just hit a fake number and then you're allowed to think about the game. So you might just do passing for the sake of it. They'll flip that on its head, Palmeiras, and they'll say, you've got a maximum of 5 passes before you can score. Now think about what that does to the player's brain as a 11-year-old. They're now constantly thinking about the game. How can I best affect the game?
Yeah.
Because you've not just got a minimum target to hit. So what's going to develop a football intelligence more? That or the one that's robotically telling him, you must make these passes? Because when you do those kind of roles, how often do you see players just do a pass just for the sake of it, just to hit a number? And I think you can see that being replicated. You can see that being replicated in first team football. There's so many times I see a player now make a pass for the sake of the pattern, and I'm like, but you've actually haven't even thought about the possibility of going that way potentially. Whereas I think, and that comes from young development, and I think that's where we've gone too far in terms of, like, yes, there's less players taking risks in a certain way in terms of showing individual personality. There's way more risk in terms of playing out from the back, but done under the stewardship of what the coach says must happen. And I don't think that's how you develop young players in the best way possible. I believe in an overall framework and empower them within that. And then you're going to have the far more intelligent players that are able to, because if you develop that as a player, the idea should be that they understand what goes on, hopefully, if they can take it on board. So when they go and play in the first team, if the manager wants them to play in a very strict pattern of play like Conte used to do, you'd like to think their brain has developed a situation where they can adapt it to each situation and coaching standards. And I don't think it can work I don't think it works the other way around.
This is where I'm really fascinated about this, because there's this mix between freedom that is needed to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes, because as we all know, you learn more from those things. But then there's also, so this whole podcast kind of came from, I was watching LeBron James' new podcast and didn't really understand a lot of it because it's basketball. But what he was talking about was kind of information gathering and then being able to do that. So like one quote he said there's guys in the NBA that if you call a play or the coach draw a play to one side of the floor, they can't switch it in their head. So what they're saying is that they'll draw up a play on the side that's to go down this right-hand side, let's say. But because of whatever reason, they need him to actually flip it and play on the other side. The point is that what LeBron James was saying in terms of what makes you kind of elite and what's the difference between the top and that next level, it felt like it was a mix of, it was a lot of information gathering and then being able to distill that into very, very quick decisions. So when you're talking about kind of freedom, but at the same time, like repetition and experience and understanding, I'm just a bit, not confused, but like David Silva, is he smarter, or these Barcelona guys, is he smarter because he's played in such a drilled fashion?
It's coaching styles.
See what I'm trying to get
methods.
Yeah, go on.
So yeah, I think it's coaching styles and learning methods. Players learn different ways. Some can be told, this is what we're doing, and they take it in straight away. Some need to see it visually And it's the same with the coaches. What are their coaching styles? They're telling you what to do. That's what you do. Or is it Q&A where you're getting... When you said why, that is the biggest thing. For players to understand why they're doing everything. There's too many training sessions that I've seen where players are told, this is what you've got to do. And they'll do whatever they're told because they're employed by the club. And
also young and impressionable, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
want, you know...
They just want to do well and
But
stick
it's
around.
understanding the why. And that's
Yeah.
what they need to understand, because then they're getting the bigger picture. But in terms of players understand the coaching styles and learning methods, players learn differently. I'm not sure what you was like.
Yeah, what was
But
your
if you
experience?
force... Sorry, just on that, because I'd like your answer on this. If you force players at a young age to play a certain way, you then take away the why, don't you? Because you're not allowing them to think for themselves. So how is that going to benefit them when they're older? They might learn that pattern of play. And I don't know if you had the same thing when you were growing up. You know, I imagine you coming through the academy, you were allowed a lot more scope to make your own decisions on a pitch.
Yeah, you were, but it's essentially like a different style of football altogether.
Yeah.
And I think as I look at, say, City's academy now, and this might be the case with other academies, the longer a manager is in play, the more the club starts to fall into their image. So for City's academy might look different if Guardiola wasn't at the helm today. You know, all the little tweaks which you saw with their first team, that's happened throughout that academy. But I think the why is an interesting thing, because as you get older, I think you understand it more because you look to it because you've experienced it before. But I think for young people, the ones who are the best of the best, they see a different game from early doors anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But not everybody does. And I think in speaking today, it's a reminder again that there are lots of people who are really good, then there are some people who are excellent. And that's not just players, that's like managers and coaching as well.
Yeah.
Because there are some coaches, for example, like some people make the case that say like Guardiola and are like, they're only good because they've always had the best players. Yeah. But then in saying that, if say the Wilder was the manager of Man City for the last 7 years, or City have been as successful as they have been, the likelihood is that they wouldn't have been. That's the likelihood. Not to say that it's not the case, but likely wouldn't have been. Because there's a skill to the certain elements you try and coach. And for those players that say have been to Man City, they've all gotten better. But what's made them better was likely to do with the coach and the vision the manager has. Because we can all pull out a tactics board and say, this is what we want them to do. But can you explain that to the players to where they'll do it without even thinking? You know, and then they can still have their abilities within that. And again, academy-wise, there are some players who they are good. We can always sense that one that's something special.
Different.
You know what I mean? And they might not necessarily be in a position whereby managers, and every academy age, you know, the managers change every single year. But you can always still sense that person. And I think in this era whereby there's more structure, that person can stand out more in a good way or a bad way because they feel like such a maverick. But then also if they can tactically be good and then still feel like the best player.
I think that's the thing. So there's this big talking point about, you know, yes, individuality was football back in the day and stuff like that. And that's why it came to football intelligence to me from a point of, as well. Because like when you're talking about, if you play five-a-side now, like that's that level of like intelligent quality, all those things, right? And football through the years, and I think a big thing here is, you know, the world we live in. You are able to see your training sessions. You're able to have a GPS on you to see where you've gone, touch mats, all these things. And when you're seeing that time and again, when we're talking about pictures, which is so important when you're in on a football pitch, you kind of probably have a better picture because it's been painted in 1,000,000 times every single day. And so tactically, at the highest level, the distances, I think, between teams is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. So that ability to have that individuality becomes harder because
more necessary as well, though.
Necessary, yes, to change the game, and I think you can still see it. But we're using the word, let's say, like the robot element of it. I think what you're kind of meaning as well, and you alluded to it as well, is that it's before it was about certain individuals. Now it is the whole team is a blob. It's not a blob. It's like this perfect little. It's its own being. So to step away from it is probably a little bit maybe dangerous. With the
yes
ball or
and no.
without the ball.
Yes and no. So I would say honestly,
Also without the ball, probably.
I would probably say the age range I tend to work with a lot of the time is sort of 17 to 21, and obviously players they continue working on past those ages, but that's where most of my players are right now. And I would say 70% of the time, a player at some stage, whether they've come to me pretty last minute out of desperation because they've not been performing and they're worried about getting released or not getting off the pro. When that's happened, I would say 90% of the first thing they say to me is, I feel like I've lost my spark and the manager is telling me I can't do the things that I know makes me who I am. And that for me isn't coaching and that isn't football intelligence. Imagine, I don't know why I use Hazard as an example, but imagine Hazard, right, when he was at his prime at Chelsea. Imagine if Conte told him, you're only allowed to go down the line and cross the ball. It wouldn't happen. No one would be naive enough to do that. But imagine that was their pattern of play. Do you really think Hazard would listen to that? Probably not. And would Hazard go and have the incredible career he'd do anyway? Of course he would, all right? Whether that's at Chelsea or elsewhere. Now, you can't ignore managers and coaches, but by the same token, you have to show who you are. And I think at least if you do that and it doesn't work out, at least you went out on your terms, not someone else's. And
I want to throw a curveball there.
Yeah, go on.
Because football's a business. And I agree with what you're saying. But when you're first team, whatever style the gaffer wants to play, you have to be able to adapt.
This is before that stage, though. They're not.
Okay.
These are the plays that are coming to me, and this is what I'm talking about intelligence. Where if you're developed in the right way, you should hopefully be able to have the decision making. It's not everyone's going to do it, as you said. Like players, everyone thinks differently. But this is the players that are just perhaps before that thing of like first
21s.
team. Yeah, and it's like. And it's not quite working for them.
Don't even get me started on 21s football.
I mean, that's a whole other thing that,
well, I'm going to have to.
Yeah, no, I'll join in with him.
What's the problem with 21s?
It's not real at all to the game of professional football, first team football.
So what's okay about under 18s but wrong with
scholars? 21s? So you've got scholars. I always say there's 5 stages before you've made it as a professional football player. And my issue is there's so many parents and players that have social media accounts and think they've made it already. You've got a 2-year contract from 12s to 14s, 2-year contracts 14s to 16s, 2-year scholar 16s to 18s. Then you've got your first year pro. Then you've got your second year pro. Once you've completed them 5 stages, you have a chance then of making it. And then only until then, that's when you can start acting, posting like you've made it. There's too many players that get a scholarship that want all the photos in the back of a car, toiletry bags, and you've still got 2 more stages to go. So my thing with, you've got scholars 16 to 18, and then under 21s, if you ever watch a game, the amount of time that they have on the ball, your job from 18s to 21s needs to be playing first team football, any level. The problem is with young players, it's not sexy enough to play non-league. You can't turn up in your designer gear, your toiletry bag, and play non-league conference.
And you're seeing that all the time.
And that happens. The players would prefer to stay at their pro club, life of luxury, and stay at under 21s instead of going non-league training Tuesday, Thursday evening. Some non-leagues are full-time, but it's just not sexy enough. However, the problem is once you're released at an under 21, clubs want players that have got first team experience, regardless of the level. You can't be playing at Man United's 21s for 2 years and have not had no first team men's football.
Clubs don't really tend to give a shit if how well you've done for the 21s because it's not relevant to what they do. Right. All right, and I agree with what you're saying, and I think actually this might surprise people. In my opinion, it's actually, this is all relative. Obviously, it's too easy to get a first pro contract. It should be harder to get a pro contract. I see too many players that get a pro contract, the first one, that just aren't there yet.
And that's stage 4 for me.
Yeah.
Like, they're the 5 stages.
See, I break it. I don't break it down into. I break it down into ways of like. I think the biggest hurdles to jump is obviously, can you get the pro contract? That's a huge hurdle. Can you make your appearance in first team football? That's a huge hurdle. The biggest hurdle to jump is, can you now have a career? Because it's sometimes players can get a first appearance based off of talent, or we want you to stay and sign a contract. Yeah. You know, you're a talented young player,
or it's the Christmas break, and
whatever it might be, injuries. But now, can you make it last? Now that's where the mentality comes in. Can you make it stick in professional football? And then I guess the final hurdle will be, how far can that career go? So, and I think you're right. I think there's too many things, too many tangibles that shouldn't be there, that put things in a way for young players. And I don't know if it was the same. The social media wouldn't have been the same when you were growing up.
The FA understand this as well, because it was under 23s football, because there was such a big gap between 23s and first team football. Right. And now it's gone back down to 21s because I don't know why we got rid of reserve football. I think one thing that I find when I work with young players
is not only do they learn a ton from playing against adults,
Yeah.
they learn a ton from playing with them. So Man United have got a system right now, which I really like, is they've got in their 21 squad, they sign an overage player.
Yeah,
so
Huddleston,
it
right?
was
Tom
it was Paul McShane, and then it's Huddleston.
Yeah.
And as long as it's done in the correct way, I think that can be really useful for those young players, because it's one thing you will have knowledge. Yeah, well,
I know both of them. Yeah.
No, do you fancy it?
Oh no, absolutely not. No.
You will have knowledge though that you have gathered from having your 15 plus years of pro football, that you and then how you behave on the pitch, how you behave in
Standards, right?
Right, and 21's football is so far removed from what that looks like. It's scary.
So you think the only way is to sort of go and play actual
It's
games,
not
even
the
at that low
only
level,
way.
as quick as
Every now and again, you have the Phil Fodens that go straight into it, and they've been developed into that way of playing. And those are the success stories you hear about, but you don't hear about the 99.9% of others that have played the Man City way for so long. Now they haven't made it into the first team, and now they're going into different environments and being asked to do things that they've never been asked to do before.
Going out on loan, getting first team experience is your main priority. Eze at QPR went to Wickham, and he was still running the show at that age group at QPR with the 18s, with the 21s, but he could have stayed there and just been the player that all the scouts come and
It's
look
not
at.
real to your point, right?
I won't say the player's name. It's not appropriate. But there was a player that was a very, very high performing under 21s player, and he got his first loan into first team football. And this kid found 21s football too easy, playing for one of the better teams, one of the best players. And I worked with one of the players that was up against him that day for his debut in first team. I kid you not, the 15 minutes that the manager had with the players before they go out, 14 of those minutes were telling his players, that's that young player's debut today. You're going to stick it on him every single moment you get. You're going to put the ball down his throat. One of you's going to dig him in their ribs, all that kind of stuff. They lost by quite a few goals. He was at fault for every single goal.
Wow.
And he'd never had that before. Now, I don't think that you has to be as old-fashioned as people saying you've got to go get beaten up and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be that. But you do have to understand what first-team football looks like, how players hold themselves, how you behave on a pitch, how you understand...
It's people's livelihood, isn't it?
People's livelihoods, yeah. You have to understand what that looks like and that entails. And that is so far removed in how
It's a results business,
It's a results
football.
business, yeah.
It's still part of development when you're under 21.
You're keeping...
Are you sort of having flashbacks to
No,
is there trauma here?
No. It's really interesting listening to people who are still involved in terms of coaching young people, because I don't have that relative access to young people.
Sure.
Like I speak to the 21s coach at City and Barry Murphy, and it's interesting because that team had been very successful for the last few years, winning like PL2s and so on, but they've struggled a bit this year because they're very young.
Yeah.
But we're talking about how, like, in some ways it's good that they're experiencing a different side. Like, they had a game, I think, against Bradford, and they lost 3-0. But stats-wise, they had all the possession, they had all the shots. But then they hit them 3 times over with 3 certain types of goals, which they should expect to have should they enter the world of men's football. So it is interesting to hear that side of things. And the whole academy system now, like, it's interesting because I could offer like an alternate view on everything, and I don't disagree with the stuff that you've said. I don't disagree with it at all, because there are some players I know, for example, who would be at City, and they'll be told the manager likes you, wants you to stay around, and at City you're either there or you're not. Mm-hmm. So you think to yourself, well, do I want to be at City or do I want to go elsewhere? Because for a lot of people who step out, like, they're done.
Yeah.
And it's quite hard at that
that is
point
a tough decision
for some of these guys to almost make the call. It's like a mature decision to make the call. I'm not going to make it here.
like reps and minutes is, like you said about Eze. I think we've seen it with numerous players at QPR where first 10 games you go, wow. Then the next 50 games they're kind of okay, and then they get to a point where they kind of get themselves back up there. But if you don't have the games, you don't
Carl
get the
Walker,
knowledge, right?
When he first came to us, we made him who he is. Like he was, and then I think he went
He was a joke.
to Villa afterwards. But it's like he wants that first team experience and the filter system. If you're at a Cat 1 and you get released, you're going to filter down. You can still sort of stay in the system. It's more for sort of if you're at Cat 2s and you get released and have no first team experience. So
you're speaking about reps, and this is where, again, I think we're making less of the player that can think for themselves and why it's an issue. You see so many coaches nowadays that repeat reps. And even if I break it down, I've done a session last year. I work with this player all the time. There's one session in particular, and he's a pro, right? He's played in the Premier League and so on, young player. And he wanted to work on one specific kind of finish that I eulogise about, call it the one-step finish, where it's like you don't give the keeper time to react. Anyway, he wanted to really work on that. But he kept getting it wrong because he was so robotically in his head, I must do this finish. But that's not real, because what happens if something breaks that rhythm? The ball might go that direction instead of that one. Now it's like, I'm locked into, I've got to do this. So now you're not giving the capacity for the brain to adapt. I told him, listen, you know what you're trying to achieve overall. You want to work on this. Just play football. All right? Whatever comes, deal with it. Not a coincidence that he started to really get that finish more often, because now he's just playing. He's trusting his instinct. He's trusting his ingenuity, rather than being told you must do this. Because if you say that you have to do this, let's hope that every single situation leads to that being able to happen. How often does that happen? It's football. One moment you might have someone digging you in your back. There might be a bobble somewhere. The touch might be a little bit out of sync with what you want. If you're just locked into, I must do it this way, you're not creating the thinking footballer. You're creating a robot that's just, paint by numbers.
Yeah.
And that is a big issue. But actually,
accepting reality.
Exactly. If you have the overall framework, so we knew that we wanted to work on this finish, but I told him, stop prioritising that, stop forcing that, just let it happen. It's then not a coincidence that he nailed that finish more often, because now he's just playing and now he's falling into that natural rhythm. And if it didn't quite work out, now the quality's still there because he's a top footballer. He's just adapted to it. So he's done something different and made it work. That's football.
I've got to say as well, the role that you have, and sort of the role that other players within teams have, I think is very important. Because I think a manager, and it's obviously different at academy level when you're all the same age, all the same experience. But as a pro, your role to younger players is massive. And unfortunately, like through some of my years, there's an element of hostility towards younger people because they are different. And some of the older ones, the more experienced ones, they don't want someone to do well because they believe it's going to be at their expense.
Sure.
That kills people, because realistically, like, say if the last few years of my career, if we're doing a train session, like, I know the why. But some of these people don't. So if they're doing something that goes against the why, I'll try and explain to them why we're doing it. And it's not something to take away from their games, to help them understand what the manager wants to see from them in this.
Yeah.
Understanding things that sort of matter. Because I took it upon myself, like those last 3 years at QPR, I was captain, Chris Ramsey made me captain, and he said I was going to be good for the younger people, and I felt that I was, because at that time, you see Bereze, Bright Say, Samuel, Elias Chair, people like this. And they were a supremely talented group of people that didn't really know how to play professional football. So myself, James Perch, Carl Henry, Alex Smithers, a few others, we used to play a young v old every Friday, and we'd always beat them, but we'd never outplay them.
Yeah.
But we'd always beat them. And after the game, we'd be talking about, like, why? Well, this is this. And we knew how good they were. Like, he's so talented, but it's just that, thing there.
But that click comes from experience.
Yeah, it does.
There's
and that's
no
the thing.
other way around that. It feels like to me.
It depends, because some people, they almost feel like they're very experienced from being quite young. Like, say, the star boys of today, they don't play like young people.
Yeah.
They play like stars,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You feel like, like
You
Saka, you feel like he's 29, don't you?
Like Bellingham feels like he's mid-20s or something, you know. So there is something, but they're probably outliers.
Yeah. But Bellingham is playing for Birmingham at 16.
Yeah.
He goes to Dortment, because that's the other thing.
He's an outlier.
He's an extreme
He is an
outlier.
outlier. I appreciate, and his mindset is
He's more reminiscent of what there was 20 years ago. I'm just a good footballer.
So-
I'm going to go play.
I want to explore the Bellingham thing. So with LeBron and basketball, obviously it's two teams going at it, but there's a lot more points and there's a lot less players. But I feel like, as much as there is so much more tactical nous out there, and it is about these kind of machines, Bellingham has been the best, I think, I would imagine, especially if he's getting game time at 16 and going to Dortmund and being outrageous at 17 and taking on Man City at that point, and so on and so on. If you are so much better, and I think his mentality is so impressive, and I think his mentality comes down to the fact that he absolutely wholeheartedly believes he can affect the game.
Yeah.
So when you have that, and you step into these new arenas each time. And I think the Bundesliga route is a really smart route as well, because I think it's better than the Championship, obviously, but it's possibly not the same as the Premier League and maybe not the same spotlight. But he's able to be the guy at these different levels and have the mentality that I want to go and affect the game, go and win the game. So that even at this level, and I think he's fortunate that he's got Real Madrid and Ancelotti, and Ancelotti's a bit more relaxed with allowing a team to go and win a game. He still has that confidence and ability to try stuff and go and win a game. He looks more like a Gerrard than anyone else really in the game.
You're
right now
so
for me.
authentically yourself.
He is.
That it now becomes irrelevant what anybody else thinks about you. You're going to go do what you do no matter what. You're going to dictate your career no matter what. And then it's up to other people if they want to fall in line and like it or don't. If you don't like it, no problem. If Real Madrid didn't like it, no problem. Barcelona would have liked it.
I still don't think he's better than Jemba though. I don't think he's, yeah.
But to your Hazard point, like the Hazard thing, the Tarap thing, you accept people, you create new rules for people if they're good enough, right? So
not really. Not in England, we don't. In
I
England,
Hazard, you still kind of like
every now and
let him
again.
do
But
his thing.
every now and again, you watch England, right? England, I think by and large, has
England
a bit
Premier
of
League or national team.
national team, probably. I think, but as a culture, I think we have more of the. You're not allowed to show personality. You must fall in line. You're allowed to fail.
Is that the gaffer or is that?
I just think it's the culture of the country. I really do believe that. I think in England
It's
they
a
allow
passion.
you.
We are. It is
Yeah,
a
no,
passion
you're
thing,
allowed.
isn't
You're
it?
allowed to be passionate losers. Like, is what it is. Like, they allow you to fail if you give them blood, sweat, tears. But you're not allowed to fail if you've shown personality and made a mistake by trying a bit of creative flair. Now you're going to get everyone hounding down on you, and that I think is a massive. That's where someone like Bellingham is an outlier. They are just they are just authentically themselves, no matter what.
Nature versus nurture. Let's say your name is Baines Galcott, right? And you've got a son who's just turned 2.
Is that the name of your son? Come on, mate.
Baines, yeah. We're trying to get close. Anyway, in terms of nature versus nurture, if you've got a child and they have the best coaching from the start to the end, is there no way? What's the percentage of them making it as a pro footballer?
I think you can certainly not guarantee it because everyone's brain works differently. But I think there's a lot in your control that can get you an initial pro contract, as we alluded to earlier. But can you then have a career in the game? That's a whole other kettle of fish. The staying power. I think you can do enough work with a player if it's done correctly and they love the game. But again, there's so many tangibles that come into that. But I don't think it should be more difficult in today's football to get a first initial pro, but the staying long power like that. I mean, there's so many things that can come in the way of that.
I think it was Alex Inglethorpe said that you can get a player to 16, but it's that 16 to 20 or probably 23. You guys are saying that's where you find.
Obviously, you were an incredibly talented footballer. Obviously, to get to the level you did, but I'd imagine that you would probably say it's your mentality that allowed you to stay at the highest levels.
Yeah,
because there's loads of players that could probably do what you could do. There's loads of amateur footballers that can do amazing things with the ball and even have good intelligence. But your staying power,
the staying power and playing the game.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like the idea of I've got 3 kids, and they're kind of interested in football, but not really interested in football. But if they ever decided that they wanted to be, I know all the stuff that could help them on a day-to-day basis because I see them playing for their teams and the coach and all that, and it's comfortable, it's fine. But I know further down the road what will actually matter.
Yeah.
And I think as well, looking at some kids,
when would you want them to take it seriously, or when would be a smart time to take it seriously? Do you think
they could start from whenever if they love football.
I love it, right?
Like my not my son, but friends that have, like the kids just have a football constantly around the house.
Yeah. And
you can't sort of stress enough the importance of getting touches on the ball, being comfortable with it. They love to play. They want to go out in the back garden, want to be kicking shots at goal and all this. And it, again, as I say, I think if you coach them with the best resources available from young, it will 100% make them better. Mm-hmm. It might not make them capable of being professional because they might have other things that are missing. But when you find the person that has that spark or that physical bit, or both things in there, and you give them that, you've created something that's like, in my mind, will be special.
I'm on that journey at the moment. So my son Theo is I've got the approach with him where
Project Mbappe.
he does whatever he wants to do.
Yeah.
Like, I don't force. I'd love him to want to do. Yeah. And I love that sounding like a dad. However, people expect him to be a certain level just because of what I do. And when I train players in my garden, we've got the gym, we've got all the equipment. He's just not bothered. And I'm okay with that because I want him to just enjoy it. However, I understand, and comparing him to, we was in Holland last weekend. We played Ajax, played their age group. We played Arsenal and West Ham and Fulham last weekend. And it's seeing the difference in the players that are really intense, that want it, that have one-on-one coaches 2-3 times a week. And I understand and have seen by the time they're 14, 15, the love for it is gone.
Yeah.
Like they're just doing too much. And this starts from pre-academy. Kids that are age 6 or 7 years old that are training 4 times a week in London, Arsenal one day, Chelsea, Tottenham, Crystal Palace or Watford. And they will get bored of it. And it's...
Are they bored or are they burnt out?
Could be
both.
Could be
Both,
so often both.
Yeah, and I'm noticing it now. Theo is playing very well. He's playing a year up and he lacks any kind of... He's just really relaxed. And I want him to have that. The coach in me wants him, go on, just want it. Whereas I know what will happen if I force him or push him into wanting to do.
It can be a very fine line, because by the same end of the token, like if a young lad says, I want to be a footballer, you're competing against, it is an incredible achievement. So I think we've got to be careful not to become too soft in the sense of, oh, well, it's okay, just give it a go. If you're going to try and go for something, go for it.
Yeah.
But it's how you approach what that looks like. And you see it so many times when silly parents burn their player out. And it's like, yes, work hard, give it everything you've got. But I think that if you stop loving the game and loving what you do, if you love... When people say, how many sessions should I do a week? My answer is, how long's a piece of string? Unless you do stupid overboard, you could have a player that does 5 hours a week, but it could be useless work or very pointless work that could exhaust them mentally, physically, unnecessarily. Or you can have a player that works 10 hours a week, but they're working smart, they still love it. So there's not really a number per se, but it is a situation where you can easily burn a player out. But by the same token, don't just sort of let them get away with it. Now, if I do a session with a player, even if they're, a 13-year-old, and I feel like they're not giving the best of themselves, then I have to let them know about that.
Sure.
Here's something for you, by the way. This might be a controversial opinion, but you see some pros that have been around the game for a while and they say they don't love football. I think they're liars, because there are so many things which aren't fun within football that would be the easiest thing in the world to stop. Walking away from a football career beyond like a money side of things, the easiest thing in the world to do.
Right.
But then people forget, like, there's so many little things, whether it's the case of coming in to be in a team. Like, in the real world, are you in a team? No, you're not. Being adored by so many people, going out, doing a game of possession, doing keep-ups or something like that, just having the ball at your feet. Like, they love those little things.
Yeah.
But they'll say, oh, I don't watch football. Well, you don't have to watch football to still love it. Like, even say, for example, we'll mention Ben White specifically. I was at Wembley for the Community Shield final. So they beat City, and I was in the tunnel when they were all coming in. He was buzzing.
Yeah.
He was buzzing.
Yeah.
And I was looking, I was like, why are you pretending that you don't like this? You love this. You beat City at Wembley.
I'm going obviously nowhere near the level of them, but I'm going back into non-league in the summer. And probably in terms of the enjoyment, I would say probably 90% of the preparation I'm doing to get myself ready, I'm hating. I've got a bit of an injury right now. A lot of it's rehab, recovery, gym work that I find boring. Like, the 5% is probably fun, like with the ball or whatever it might be. But it's all worth it for that 1% of enjoying the feeling of when you get 3 points or you've done something in a game that works or whatever it might be. That buzz you get is worth all of the 90%. So I agree completely. Yeah.
The Ben White thing's interesting as well. Like, we were talking about it. I love playing football first, like more than watching it. Absolutely, right? At cricket, I played cricket for a long time. I never really enjoyed watching it. I like playing it. So Ben White with the sort of, I don't really watch football. I'm like, I think that's really smart.
Yeah.
Like, there's probably a lot that he's not taking in that he doesn't need to take in.
Absolutely.
Just focusing on it.
That's his own thing. There'll be other people that won't watch football all in. But then I also quite like the people that watch every bit of football available.
What I found, which is a bit of a shame, is how, again, it's a modern day thing of social media. The attention span of players watching games is massively decreased. So I'll ask like a young player, let's say that I go in and like someone wants me to do an example session for an under-12 group. I'll ask them who watches football, and I say, oh, what did you watch the weekend? And they'll always give me the little bits of like an amazing piece of skill or goal, but they don't actually watch the game. They don't like I remember when I was 10 years old, I was watching like whoever I was watching on TV. I remember Bolton for some reason, and like the ball was down. Bolton centre half had it. I can't remember who it was, but I was watching Kevin Davis and how he was moving at 10 years old. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone else, but it's like that's back then. I used to love learning about the game.
Yeah.
I think that everything nowadays, probably with TikTok and things like that, everything's done in 6-second bursts. That you're not taking in the game. You're just learning it in small segments, and that again probably leads to the robotic thing we're talking about. You're just learning a very very finite version of football, whereas football, there are countless things that can happen, but you're learning a very finite moment of it. So actually, are you that intelligent as a footballer, or are you just very good at rehashing that specific thing?
As I look back at my career, it's quite hard for me to review it. Like, I'm quite hard on myself anyway, but it's quite hard to review because in any particular moment, I don't remember what was expected of me, and I don't have the same perspective that I have today.
Yeah.
So when I watch football on TV now, like I've said this, and someone might think I'm a weirdo for this, yeah. So I've got notifications on Flash Score on my phone, yeah, and it's like maybe 5-10 seconds delayed from like stuff that's happening. So sometimes, or most of the time, I watch games on my phone, which is a minute behind.
Right.
So when I get a notification saying a goal scored, I'm like fully locked in to see every detail of how a goal's
I hate
come
when
to
that
be.
happens.
I'm the opposite.
Yeah.
But I'm the opposite, but it's because like I'm paid to analyse goals.
Yes.
So it makes me really hone in and focus on it.
Yeah.
Like I know some people say, oh, it's like a spoiler. Well, mate, it's a game. You know what I mean? It's fine.
Yeah.
But that's the way that I see it. Like I really watch games in depth now.
Yeah.
And when I was retiring towards the end of my career, like I would watch games in depth then. But as I was younger, I don't think I would have seen it in the same way because I wasn't looking for the same things.
Sure.
You know, I was more so concerned about outcomes as opposed to processes.
Do you listen with the sound on or off when you're watching games?
Depends.
That's a great point.
It depends who's commentating.
How that drives what you're seeing and what you're thinking is
it's
incredible.
massive. Oh,
it's incredible.
That's bane of my life, that, because as you play, like you realised it more when the season stuff was being played behind closed doors. Like as a player, defending a corner is perfectly normal. It's as normal as it comes. But for some reason, like they come and say, "Oh, it's another corner for them. Oh, this is going to be it."
So, all right. So when you were having goals, it didn't feel that big a moment. I guess because you're in the middle of it, right?
It's just football. Like
Yeah.
when
But
you
from a fan's point of view, when you get a corner, you
get really anxious, and then
yeah.
if you're watching a game from, it's amazing the power of the two voices in dictating the vibes of a game itself.
God.
You know what I mean? And there's so many things that I see. Like somebody had a touch in a game a couple of days ago, and it was one of the best touches I've ever seen. Yeah. And it just flew over the heads of like the commentator and whoever. We didn't even discuss it. I was like, that's the best bit of play from
Really
this whole game.
irritates me when that
Do you know what it
happens.
was? It was in the Arsenal Villa game, and Leon Bailey did a little flick on the outside of his foot for Conte to run into. I was like, oh my God. That is so sharp.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, so Villa have had a good bit of possession here. I was like, oh, what are we doing?
Again, the physical attributes and the technical attributes, and then the mental attributes. So, first of all, let's talk technical ability. So ability is control the ball under pressure, having a picture in your head, being able to manipulate the ball and the body position of others. That is something that I think a lot of people aren't looking at. How important is, I think the first one I'm going to go to is that picture in your head. Because I think that is something that doesn't get enough lip service. If I know for me, in terms of the football that I played lower semi-pro, and even by that point, I was playing with a guy, and I was thinking, his head's on a swivel, and I hadn't been taught it. So I always played as a defensive midfielder and would kind of read the game, but it was all in front of me. But if I had to, at that level, I could still get away with get it off the guy, either lay it back to the guy who's thrown it to you, or hook it into the channels, because that's what football was kind of like then. And broadly, a lot of the time, football was like over your head a lot of the time, right? You can't, like, that's the way football has changed and evolved. You can't be in centre midfield and do that now. And a thing I've never had, and I'm so annoyed I wasn't taught it, was scanning. How important is scanning?
If I work with a player, they say I get a young player that before I've had a 7-year-old, it's one of the first things I ingrain to them. So anytime I coach them, I will say, get your head up, check your shoulders, like all the time, because it is so important. And it's something that's so often ignored. There was actually a player that, again, I won't say the club, but he played for a top club as an academy player. And again, my colleague would work with him and, helped build him to a really, really incredible technical footballer, could do everything with the ball and really good habits. So even in a 1-to-1 session, he's now naturally just ingrained to like just checking shoulders. He's not even having to be asked, because that's what you need to have. And then he went in to do a session with his academy coach, right? And the academy coach done a session with him one-to-one, and he asked him, why are you checking your shoulders? No one's there. It's a one-to-one. I'm like, And then the dad was like, thank you for the session, but we're good. We'll stick to what we do and what we're doing. So I think that is such a huge habit, but it's important to do it the correct way as well, because so many players, like young players in particular, you'll tell them to take the shoulders, they'll do that. I'm like, well, you just moved your neck. You didn't actually take any information. So
in reading about this a bit more, and again, you guys are giving me so much more than I will, so I'll just set it up for you. Because that's the thing, in terms of football intelligence, is again, with the scanning, there's the scanning generally, then there's the critical scan, right? Which well, this is what was said to me. Critical scan is when that pass is coming to you and you're having that look whilst the pass is on its way for that kind of final.
It's a process, yeah.
Right. That is, as much as that's football intelligence, that's information gathering. So you could be as stupid as you want to be, as long as you're gathering enough information to know who's knocking around.
Yeah, but it's how you empower that.
Yes.
Like, so, for example, let's say if I'm working with a player, like right at the start, I might not give him too many things to think about. It's basically just get him into the good habit of doing that. But then in time, it might be, right, well, when you're scanning, I might be holding up different numbers, and you've got to like say what number I'm holding up. Or if I hold up a white cone, that means that you're then going to turn out how you want to. If I hold up a red cone, then you can go like this. So now I think it's called situational probability or something like that. Okay. And it's where you can't exactly mimic what goes on a pitch, because obviously every situation is different, but you can teach the brain to adapt and put it into situations where when you are looking up, at least you're thinking and making decisions. Processing. Yeah. And it's like, hopefully that the idea is you can relate that into what goes on in a game and then increase the challenges. So now it can be, can you now do it under pressure with someone there? Now can you do it in a team environment and those challenges and help build it? You're never going to replicate the game, but you can. And it's where people like, I never understood when people say, it's a bit of a different thing, but it's the same kind of concept when people say you can't practice penalty shootouts. I'm like, you definitely can. You definitely can. You can't mimic the crowd and the pressure, but you can definitely mimic the situational probability where you've done this so many times that you can almost go into autopilot a little bit. That's why Kane's so good at penalties. Most pro footballers can strike off ball really well. But you see Kane, he is situational probability. He has the same routine every single time. Now, that's a really isolated skill, but it's more the overall point of like, you can help educate the brain to take in information that you can make relevant to...
And that comes into painting pictures. And yeah, so one of the players that I work with is a penalty taker. And when Ivan Toney wasn't playing, he was the penalty taker for Brentford. And we would practice time and time again penalties. I would put 2 goalkeepers in goal when we was doing it, just to make it, because his penalty was a one step, like the just walk. It wasn't put your foot through it. And it's just about painting pictures. And people think you can't paint pictures with a penalty. It's just a strike. Whereas you need to create that environment or a scenario. And it would be as simple as we'd do penalties on an Astro pitch. We'd go to a bad park, a really muddy pitch. And it was just, and it's so simple, but where we'd normally train, amazing facilities. And it's just it would go from penalties to whether we're just doing a certain type of finish. And the amount of stats that there are in football, it lets you know how many touches you've taken every game, where you've taken them for forwards, every shot or every key pass on target. And it's painting them pictures where psychologically the players know the last game you had 3 shots, 2 were blocked, 1 was off target. So we would replicate that the following week in training, just so that if that opportunity comes again, and it may never come again, but psychologically they're like, I've got this next time it comes.
If I work on finishing, let's say it could be a good player, but let's say he's not an elite finisher right now. If I work in it, let's say in the post, I'll put a cone on the inside of a post, but also just a bit on the outside of the post, because people might say, why would you like have that as the mini goal? But they've missed. But if you can teach the brain that you're aiming for that kind of area, you're now really thinning down the margin for error, and like they're now more locked into that repetition of like where you want the ball roughly to go. Whereas I don't like them. So many coaches nowadays use those fake goals where like the top corners are massive, and it's like it might go in, but I'm like, well, yeah, but like it's not really top corner, is it? The goalkeeper's going to save that.
I use them, by the way.
Do you?
Yeah, I thought that was going to be.
Well, there we go. That's my.
You got to get him feeling good, though.
I think with the scanning thing, what I think is important is the word which you've not mentioned actually is awareness. that's a key part of it. Because if I'm playing in a game and I'm trying to win the ball from someone and I know they don't know I'm there, that dictates how I'm going to try and take the ball away from them. When somebody is essentially in a position whereby they always know where you are, they always know the right place to play the next pass, like it's very hard to try and sort of affect them in a negative way. Same goes, say, and again, you're talking about on a swivel. On a swivel is even different when you're receiving the ball at the back because the game's in front of you. I'll be honest, going into a central position, mate, it's carnage. It's carnage.
You fancied that inverted fullback role?
It's the same as, like, say, you could play right back, then you go left back. Mate, you look in a different way. Body shape's all different. It's not as simple.
The pictures
as
are different, right?
Pictures are completely different.
That's why it's so impressive for me what John Stones has done. It's not about the fact that he's just now moving into midfield. It's the fact that he is for so long been used to the game always being in front of him, and now the game's all around him, and he's just as arguably even better than he was. Like, that is what is so remarkable.
It's
and
interesting
impressive.
as well with that because Guardiola must have seen a tendency in him to think that he could be the right person to instill this vision. You know what I mean? And that's the thing again, like to coach him into it, to show him and to see how much he's developed. Like, it's amazing.
And that for me is the epitome of football intelligence. All right, there's various ways it can be done, but that is John Stones. That is a pure footballer. That you're picking him up and you're putting him in different situations. Like, it's fine, I got this, I know what I'm doing. If you put John Stones on the left wing, he'd know what to do. All right. Same thing. If you put Harry Kane at centre back, he would know what to do. All right. He's not going to be a deer in headlights. He would know, and that for me is the broader footballer. But again, there's so many like different avenues of it. But that is the epitome of it for me. It's that ability to just understand the game and what it requires, and then they'd be able to do it.
Amazing, guys. Nedham's got to get his train. So very final question, super quick, if you can do. If anyone was looking to improve their football intelligence, what would you advise them to do?
Wow. Have a framework that you're working on for each thing you do, but within that framework, don't get locked into it having to be a certain way. Like, try to empower players to make their own decisions. Put different things in place that empower them to make decisions that are relevant for the game. Yeah.
Whatever position you play in, look at YouTube clips, players out of position, what's their movement like? And you can find analysis clips on YouTube as it is, so you don't have to watch a full game, but just watch players' movement that play in your position or similar positions, what their movement is like out of possession, and learn from what they're doing.
Amazing.
I would agree, yeah. I think it's about problem solving, you know, whether it's individually or collectively. Yeah. Because from once you see it, if you see it once, then the next time you see it, you'll know how to approach it. And it doesn't necessarily need to be you going through it. You can learn from other people, and as a consequence, it helps you on the field.